Warning, this video contains team selection and captain choices which some viewers may find offensive.
Hey guys, and welcome back to FPL TV. Before looking to the final game week before the World Cup break, let's see how the side performed in last weekend's Game Week 15. It was an extremely difficult start to the game week, with the FPL servers crashing around 20 minutes before the deadline, and therefore mass panic ensuing for FPL managers worldwide, as we then found out that Haaland was benched and many couldn't make their changes. Fortunately for me, my change did go through, and I managed to take the armband away from Haaland after refreshing the app many times. However, in the end, this ended up being the opposite of fortunate, because despite Haaland getting benched, he came on and scored in the 95th minute to beat Fulham, much to the relief of all those that were stuck with him as captain after being stitched up by the FPL servers. Ultimately, with me seeming to be the lucky one at the start to have succeeded in making my changes, typically this ended up with me losing points and being worse off, as not only did I transfer in arguably FPL's biggest ever troll, but I also gave him the captaincy too, who painfully and yet inevitably got subbed off at half time for one f***ing point. Why always Wilson? Newcastle did go on to score 4 goals in that game too, a game in which I fancied them to win comfortably, so definitely frustrating that even when Haaland's benched, I ended up losing ground. This season, regardless of the situation each game week, it's just never not been painful going against him. In fairness, I am partly to blame here, because Wilson himself was a slight illness concern before the deadline. But still, it was unlucky for him to start and then make way at half-time with no returns. To make things worse, Cancelo was sent off in that Fulham fixture, and with Mitrovic in my side then surprisingly missing out completely, Andreas took and scored the penalty, a player that I put stupidly behind Neco Williams on my bench, so just a series of unfortunate events really. The sheer coordination of Andreas either blanking in my team or scoring on my bench has been so perfectly synchronised over the past few game weeks, it had turned the heads of even an Olympic synchronised swimming team. You just couldn't have timed it better if you tried. Enough of the whinging though. In fairness, despite the Wilson frustration, I have to admit that during the server crash and chaos, I very nearly put the captaincy on Cancelo instead, so it could have been a lot worse. Elsewhere in the game week, there were some positives however, with Zaha and Trippier doing the business, and with the Ivorian being fairly low owned in respect to my other players, well, that did wonders for the ranking. Castagna too continuing to be a budget revelation in my squad, still having returned in every single game week that I've utilised him, an unsung hero this season. A single assist between the Arsenal double-up in midfield was also welcomed in that tricky fixture away to the Bridge, whilst Nick Pope of Newcastle was so close to a clean sheet, but sadly conceded a consolation in the dying moments. In the final fixture of the game week, still looking at another red arrow, fortunately Mo Salah did salvage the game week for me, bagging 2 goals against Spurs. Of course, there was then some regret to not have captained him, especially after all the faith I'd shown him in previous game weeks. Perhaps it was a mistake to have opted for Wilson over him, especially with Wilson listed as an injury concern, but there's no going back now. Newcastle did score 4, so in that respect I was at least on the right lines. So for Game Week 15, it was a score of 62, with Mo Salah in the final fixture turning the red arrow to green single-handedly. I rose from 1.1 million to back inside the top million, so that's where I hope to stay now before the World Cup break. And despite not captaining Salah, I have to say it was a nice experience to still enjoy and benefit from his points even when he's not your captain. It's something we haven't seen often in FPL over the years. A Mo Salah haul as a differential certainly hits different. Let's move on to Game Week 16 now, check out my transfer plans as well as my potential team lineup. Also, if you do enjoy the content here at FPL TV, then be sure to leave a like and most importantly, get subscribed. You can also hit the notification bell now so you always know when a new video goes live in the future. Seeing as though this is the final game week before the break, and notably before unlimited transfers, this week of course was always going to be one where a big differential punt could have been on the cards. After all, there's no need for long-term planning when it comes to this week's transfers. With me only having 1 free transfer available though, and with 2 injury/illness concerns in my forward line in Wilson and Mitrovic, I'm not as flexible as I'd like to have been when looking at taking a punt this week. Tottenham's Fitigen Kulusevski was a big differential I'd have been interested in this week at home to Leeds, whilst up front, a punt on Liverpool's Darwin Núñez was certainly a tempting option at home to a now managerless Southampton. For me though, either option sadly would require a hit, and I just don't see that as necessary with only 1 game week for it to pay off. As far as I know, Mitrovic looks to almost certainly be out this week, whilst Callum Wilson still remains a question mark. So in the end, I've opted to sell Mitrovic and I brought in Gabriel Jesus. Not exactly an exciting low-owned differential as a one-week punt, and also not a player in particularly good goal-scoring form. However, considering I only had a maximum of 8.7 million to spend once selling Mitro or Wilson, Jesus for me was the standout option that I do feel has been unlucky not to score more in recent game weeks. Gabriel Jesus has seriously underperformed his XG so far this season, and despite only scoring 5 goals, he has been on the end of 15 big chances. Only Haaland has had more than that. Sure, it's a mix of poor fortune as well as some poor finishing perhaps, but I do feel that with these kind of underlying numbers, just one of these game weeks he could be in for a monster score, so who knows, perhaps that'll come against Wolves. He's been playing so well in general despite his lack of goals, and will surely be desperate to score before the break. Wolves away, of course, no easy fixture, and I will now be relying on triple Arsenal attack for that trip. But although it's a fixture I've never liked on paper, they do currently sit second bottom of the table and have recently suffered 2 heavy defeats at home, losing 4-0 at home to Leicester and losing 3-2 at home to Brighton. 7 goals conceded at Molineux in just the last 2 league games there. Promising. So with that move of Mitrovic to Jesus locked in, let's see how the side now lines up. Granted, I could have waited a bit longer and waited until the deadline again for early Man City team news just like in previous game weeks. But to be honest, I just couldn't be bothered with the risk and the stress of the site crashing again when it comes to making this free transfer. Gabriel Jesus is in now and overall I feel pretty good about it. Don't get me wrong, I'll still be active on Twitter should that early team news hit us of course, and for example if Julian Alvarez is confirmed to be starting again for City, well maybe in that case I'd be tempted to do a -4 of Wilson to Alvarez, but I think that's extremely unlikely. The main thing I'll be waiting for with regards to team news involves the captaincy obviously. Another reason that I'm not too fond on taking a -4 hit this week is that as Andreas Pereira keeps proving on our benches, he's a more than good enough option to start. So I don't see much sense in taking a -4 just to lock him to my bench for certain. I'll now be deciding whether to start Andreas ahead of Wilson completely and put him in my 11. In Eddie Howe's latest press conference, he said that Wilson has been training but training alone, away from the group with illness. So my worry there is that he's fit but not fit enough to start perhaps, therefore coming on as a late sub which I really don't want. Wilson may also have the World Cup on his mind, which although it's ultimately up to Eddie Howe if he plays or not, he does have an unfortunate injury record and may not want to be risked. Now don't get me wrong, I can't think of a situation more frustrating than me benching Callum Wilson this game week and then him going on to score against Chelsea. But with Andreas guaranteed to start against his old club, and with him notably on penalties too with Mitrovic out, there's some good justification there to start him from the off. For the captaincy in Game Week 16, for now it sits with Erling Haaland, and that's where I expect it to stay, subject of course to any potential early team news before the deadline. The Citizens are once again the early kickoff this game week, so there's every chance we may get news on whether Haaland starts or not. And if news does get released that he's not starting, then I'll be focused and on hand trying to switch the captaincy to Mo Salah, should the game crash for a 3rd game week running. Whether I'll be able to or not though is another question in that case. And it's kind of crazy that in this day and age we even have to consider these kind of things from a game that's so high profile around the world. Do better, Premier League. Mo Salah certainly very close in the running for captaincy this week, at home to win out of sort Southampton who have just sacked their manager. Even without any team news, Salah could compete with Haaland for the armband this week, but it's not something I'm prepared to risk if Haaland is confirmed to start. Haaland captain, Mo Salah vice is the plan, and hopefully a quick switch if there is to be any team news. So that's my team and transfers discussed for Game Week 16. With my one free transfer already confirmed this week, I'm pretty much set to be locked in, but of course that could change with any potential news to shake things up before the deadline. Andreas Pereira once again an ideal first sub for me this game week, but I now have to decide whether I start him over Wilson from the off or not, and I think I'm leaning towards doing so. Why always Wilson? If you enjoyed the video, then be sure to leave a like and most importantly get subscribed. Good luck to you all for the final game week before the World Cup break. FPL responsibly and I'll catch you all very soon.